here shortly, but we'll go ahead and begin. Welcome to our panel today on innovation and mission. This comes out of a conversation around missional church, missional ecclesiology, and the assumption that today we cannot separate the local from the global in mission. One of the themes emphasized at last week's decennial meeting of the Commission on World Mission and Evangelism for the World Council of Churches was the conviction that mission is always embedded in local contexts. Christians engage in mission where they are, and then we bring that engagement into the bigger global conversations. Another focus in that meeting is that justice and ministry cannot be separated. They focused on mission growing from the margins. And with that idea, we see that local churches are called to hands-on transformational discipleship. Thus, innovation in ministry and mission emerge locally and from the bottom up, but is deeply relevant to the well-being of universal human community and to the planet. With these ideas in mind, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this special panel on missional innovation with focus on our local context here in New England. Today we have three young activists, all who happen to be Methodists, of different varieties, but one family, each of whom have embraced a missional imagination in their own calls to ministry. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the first two, and I will wait then for Reverend White-Hammond to get here before I introduce her. So we'll start with these two and let them each speak and introduce their mission. And then at the end of the three presentations, we'll have time for questions and engagement. Proceeding in alphabetical order, Zach Kerzee is a graduate of Harvard. Is it Kerzee, right?
Kerzee, yeah, that's great.
Graduate of Harvard Divinity School and the founding pastor of Simple Church, a farm-to-table dinner church in Grafton, Massachusetts, and the Simple Church Affiliate Network, which is a network of dinner churches with dozens of member congregations. Zach grew up in Texas, but ran to New England as fast as he could. He's a foster parent to two girls, and he and his wife are advocates for kids in the foster system. Zach is committed to simplicity as a spiritual discipline. Kerzee and Yeasir is a lifelong United Methodist who discerned a call to ministry as a lay person. She and co-founder George Halfpenny founded Thrive in 2015 to empower adults returning from incarceration and to integrate individual community members into the experience of re-entry. With a bachelor's in social work from Michigan State University and a master's in social work from Boston College, Kim has over 10 years experience in nonprofit development, community organizing, building partnerships, evaluation, and fundraising. Before founding Thrive, Kim trained as a mediator with the Community Dispute Settlement Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts, served as a restorative justice facilitator with Communities for Restorative Justice in Concord, and became a facilitator with the Alternatives to Violence program, where the spark for Thrive began. So please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Zach asked me to go first, so I'll get us started, share a little bit more about Thrive Communities. So as you heard, I'm not a theologian per se, but discerned this call as a layperson. And Thrive is a secular nonprofit, and that was a difficult decision to make. We thought a lot about whether we would be integrated into as part of the church. But after thinking about a number of factors, including access people might have to our services, entry points, and the need for kind of supporting people from a much broader perspective, we decided to secular, but partner very deeply with faith-based communities. And so that's kind of where all of that decision-making came from, but a little more about Thrive. So we support adults returning after incarceration and connect people to networks of support and accountability within their community. And we approach this in 3 ways. One is what we call restorative reentry. So it's a way of, how many people have heard about restorative justice in this room? I know that BU has some, so a good number. Does anyone want to venture to share what restorative justice is in like a 2-sentence statement as best you can? No test. It's a way of addressing harm in the community and giving voice for those most impacted. And so in reentry, we're looking at people returning to the community. We're looking about the impacts that within the community that happened regarding any crime that took place, and the role that the community has in all of those factors. And so in restorative reentry, we connect a returning citizen with 3 community volunteers, and that team will meet once a week for the first year of reentry, building meaningful relationships, working through challenges, celebrating successes, and working to build wholeness in the community. You have a flyer on your table if you want to see more about that, the Circles of Support and Accountability one. The other way that we do this mission is through community building. So we have 2 community trainings where we are working to equip our community members to be stronger allies in reentry. So regardless of whether individuals have experienced incarceration themselves, have family members who have, or feel completely separated from that challenge, we want to offer an entry point in supporting returning citizens. And then the third piece is through leadership development. And that's empowering individuals who have experienced incarceration, have been out for a period of time, and really have a vision for what they'd like to see in the community. And so we work with them to help bring that idea into reality. So those are kind of the 3 basic areas where we're providing services. And we're just 1 year into fully serving people on the ground. So yeah, that's just kind of the entry point.
Hi y'all, I'm Zach. Dr. Robert said to give like a little intro for like 15 minutes. John, will you be my timekeeper?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure. I'm from Texas, so I can talk all day about anything. So I'll be sure to set firm bumpers on the road for myself, make sure I don't go over. Like Dr. Robert said, I am the founding pastor of Simple Church. The background of what we did, like how we got started. In 2014, I was graduating from Harvard Divinity School, and I was kind of actively looking for what I was going to do and just praying that I was going to get an appointment. I was a licensed local pastor at the time, so I didn't have any like guaranteed job when I graduated. I was starting to feel the pressure. It was like April 15th-ish, and I was like, all right, what am I going to do? And then I got a call from the congregational developer, and he said, theoretically, if we offered you a full-time church planting job somewhere, would you take it? And I said, yes. Because it had the word full-time in it, right? Through the discernment process in the New England Annual Conference, ended up talking to my wife about it. We'd just been married at that point, and somehow got her to agree to move out to Grafton, which is on the exit 11 on the Turnpike. It's about an hour from here. The basic nuts and bolts of the story is that the church in Grafton failed. It closed. It reached the end of its ministry cycle. And they decided to close before they like absolutely had to. They got down to about 5 people, but they still had about $250,000. And so they closed before they had to, sold their building, kept their parsonage, which happened to be a farmhouse on 5 acres of formerly farmland that was surrounded by a 30-acre working farm, and then hired me as like the church planter to plant. And so we had funding for about 3 years and a place to live. And then I asked, like, all right, what do you guys want? Like, how does it have to be, like, do we have to meet on Sunday morning? They said no. I said, do we have to have Sunday school? They said no. I said, great. I said, like, does it need to be like a traditional worship service in any way? They said no. I said, great. And so that was my starting point. Was we had money, we had a location, and at the time at Harvard Divinity School on Thursday nights we had a Thursday night potluck, and what we do is we would like jam into each other's apartments. There's like 20 of us, and we would each bring a potluck dish, and we would drink cheap wine and argue about theology for hours. And I would always just like, Thursday nights were not a night that I was going to go to sleep. Like I just knew I was going to be just completely jazzed by the conversation. And I would always leave at like 2 in the morning and walk home and just be like, man, like why can't church make me feel like this? So I was given this opportunity to basically make a church that I myself would want to go to and like be cool with inviting my friends to. I decided that we were going to start a church that was on Thursday nights, that was built around a potluck, that instead of a long sermon is going to be built on conversations, that people would be encouraged to argue and disagree. I knew it was going to be built around music. And I also saw the way that like the church that I had been serving as a part-time local pastor, and just basically every church in New England, was just like burdened by the cost of the upkeep of these enormous ancient buildings that like afterwards, I'll show you a little mini documentary. Most of these buildings that we have so much like investment tied up in, were built for like $600 in the 1900s out of a catalog, okay? These aren't cathedrals, right? And they weren't built to last as long as they do. And so I'll show you that documentary later if you want to watch it, I'll send it to you. And I was just like, I just don't want any of that, I don't want to be part of that. And so I decided we weren't gonna have a building, and we were gonna call it Simple Church, and it kind of fell into place full cloth. We launched September 14th, 2014, and we've been meeting weekly since. Now we meet on Thursday nights for a Eucharistic meal. We use rented and borrowed space. We use the 5 acres the church has is now used by Potter Hill Farms as like a working farm. We raise animals on the property. We grow organic vegetables, and then we use those vegetables for the meal. So the meal is free on Thursday nights during the farmers market season. We recently started a Sunday morning church called Pancake Church that meets in each other's homes, and that's built like specifically for families with small kids. So I call it like, my friend Mike Bachman from Union Coffee in Dallas calls it boutique church. So instead of trying to create like a church that's built for everybody, you find like a specific group whose needs aren't being met. So in our case, it was families with small kids. And you provide worship experiences specifically for those like boutique groups. So Thursday night dinner church is like a boutique experience. It's not for everybody on purpose, right? It's for a specific group of people. Sunday morning Pancake Church is just for families with small kids. And then we recently started a youth group called Pizza Church that we're meeting monthly right now. And it's built around an open mic and pizza, okay? We also started the affiliate network, and that has 2 levels. We have our branches where we plant United Methodist churches, and we use money from closed church buildings. We're gonna try to do that 1 a year in a different annual conference every year. So our first one was in New England. Second one was in Worcester, which is like the town next door. We're starting one in East Dallas next this coming fall. And the plan is to kind of have a new plant every year. And each of those will hopefully be funded by monastic funding practices. How am I doing on time, John?
You have 9 minutes left.
Great. All right. That's all the time in the world. So, you know, at Simple Church in Grafton, we sell bread at local farmers markets. Bread because we make our own bread for the Eucharist, and so it's just kind of a natural extension of our ministry. That's also like our number 1 way that we meet new people is selling at farmers markets. We also we have a mobile bread oven that's registered as a food truck, and we cater weddings and events, which is a great fundraiser for us. So we shoot to have like 1/3 of our money come from bread, and then another 1/3 of our money comes from I build church websites on WordPress, and then churches donate money to the church. So about 1/3 of our money comes from that fundraiser, and then another 1/3 comes from tithe from the community. on Thursday nights, we usually have between like 30 and 40 people. Like on a really big night, we'll have like 45. And that feels like really enormous for a dinner party. On Sunday mornings, we usually have like about 30 people who are involved with the families. That is actually, we've reached like kind of a critical mass. Like you can't fit 25 people in someone's house every week. It's just like chaos. Like my wife's ready to rebel. Having it at our house, it's pretty stressful actually. And then Pizza Church, we just started it and it's about 10 kids right now. So we're excited about that. And the Worcester Church just got started. They're just like a little tiny little baby seed of a church. They're working on it. They'll get there. They're about the size we were when we first started too. And the Dallas Church, I'm really excited about. We did a preview worship service and we set tables for 80 people and 275 people showed up. So I think Texas is going to be an interesting experiment. This is a different breed of churchgoers down there. And then the affiliate network, I had a ton of people who were asking like, hey, can we do this as an extra worship service in our church? And just like have you guys there as like support. So we make all of our resources available for free. If you go to dinner.church online, all of our songs, all of our recipes, all of our liturgies are available for free. And the only thing that we ask of people is that they mention they're part of the network if they use our resources. And last I checked, we have 60 affiliates across the country right now, which is really exciting. And then the last thing I wanted to say as part of my introduction, innovation I think is really important because all of us know in our bones, and if you don't know, you should know, that all is not well. All is not well. And it seems a little bit like, as a young person entering into I'm 28, feels a little bit like the barn's on fire and no one's running for the exits. Like we are at a crisis point, and if we don't know it, we should, and we should use strong language to describe it, okay? I've preached at a lot of churches in the New England Annual Conference. I cannot tell you the number of churches I've gone in that are built for 200 and seat 10, okay? That should be a red flag. The alarm should be going off. So innovation isn't just like a catchword, it is like necessary. If we want to have a United Methodist Church, especially in New England, we have to innovate, have to. And so I have 4 principles that I'm gonna share with you that I think you just have to know. And anytime I talk to a group of seminarians, I'll be sure to mention these things. Do not ask permission to innovate. You will not be given it. If you ask permission to do something innovative, you will be told no, okay? You have to come with a fully formed idea and a plan with a conviction where people will follow you. To be an innovator is to be a leader, okay? If people understood what you were planning on doing, they would have done it, okay? They're not gonna understand it. They're not gonna understand it. So you're just going to have to do it. And that means sometimes like angering your district superintendent, maybe going off into territory where you're not sure of the legality of what you're doing. A lot of churches don't do fundraisers in the way that Simple Church did, and so the number one question I got in the beginning was, is this even legal? Are you going to lose your nonprofit status? And the answer in the beginning was, I don't know, I better call some lawyers and get determinations. One of our biggest questions we ran into was with insurance, because our church insurance wasn't set up for a bakery. Right. And so our insurance, they were like, all right, we might have to drop y'all. And that was terrifying for a few minutes, right? We worked it all out, thank God. But yeah, all these things are like if people were there, they would have done it themselves, right? So you have to kind of go off into that unknown space. And that leads into, fail. Like if you are not failing, that means you're not pushing yourself to the edge of what you're capable of, okay? You should be trying things that don't work. And you shouldn't be afraid to do that. Our system is not set up to encourage or reward failure for trying audacious things, right? People play it safe because they don't want to get fired, okay? Just be courageous. Go out there and fall flat on your face, trying things that you're not sure you can do. If you know that you can do it, you shouldn't even start. You should go out there and do things that you're not sure you can do. Because we've been really good at doing things the same way, right? And expecting different results, right? And we have a word for that, okay? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results never worked, ever. So, you have to explore the edges of what you're capable of, and if you're not, then you're not doing what you're called to do. We're called to, spread the good news of Jesus to people who are hungry and thirsty for it. If we're playing it safe, we're not doing that. Third, find a way to become financially independent. Okay? If you ask for mission, you're going to be told no. If you ask for money, you're going to be told there's no money. All right? There's money. There's oceans of money. Go find it. Okay? And here's the thing. Like, if you can pay for what you want to do, the odds of you being told that you can't do it anymore are very low. Most of the time, the reason why new ministries and things like that stop is because they've run out of money. Okay? Monastics for centuries have been taking on trades as a means of financial independence from local church authorities and from local governments. Because if someone gives you money, they own a piece of you. Okay? And if someone gives you all of your money, they can tell you to stop. Right? But if you can find a way to generate all the income that you need to exist comfortably and non-anxiously, you have a much better shot of succeeding. Most church plants fail. Okay? Most new business industries fail. Okay? And the reason why they fail most of the time is because they run out of money. Okay? So find a way to pay your own way. And then last, how am I doing on time, John?
Manageability.
Find a way to separate your sense of self-worth from the success or failure of your project. Okay? If nobody comes to your thing, you can feel like absolute garbage. If nobody comes to your thing. Like starting a new church service, I've told this to John a bunch of times. John's our intern, by the way. That's why I'm asking John to do things. If starting a new worship service feels a little bit like throwing a birthday party and hoping that people come. And especially like on Thursday nights, it's at night, so I have all day to wonder, like, is this the night that like nobody comes to our thing? Like, is this the night that people decide they don't like it? And I used to get like completely caught up in that spiral of like worry about, if it was gonna work or not. Like weeks when we didn't have a lot of people there, I felt like just the scum of the earth. And then weeks when we had a lot of people there, I was elated for the entire week. And my like attitude was completely based on how many people showed up on Thursday night. So I think the flip side of that is when things go well, if you let your ego get inflated because things are going well, when you do fail, you're gonna fall like flat on your face even harder, right? So I think we have to find a way to just be rooted in the fact of our just absolute belovedness from God. And if we can do that, we know that we're not going to get like a gold star if we're high achievers at the end, right? God loves us not because of what we do. God loves us because of who we are, right? And so we have to find a way to separate our own self-worth from the success or failure of our projects, okay? So that's Simple Church.
Okay.
I saved your introduction.
Sorry, thank you. I got a little caught in the red line today.
Hey, another survivor of the mass transit system, yes. Reverend Mariama White-Hammond serves as the Minister for Ecological Justice at Bethel AME Church in Boston and as a fellow with the Green Justice Coalition, a partnership of environmental justice groups. From 2001 to 2014, she was the executive director of Project Hip Hop, Highways into the Past, History, Organizing, and Power. In April 2016, she was ordained in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and in May 17, she graduated from the Boston University School of Theology with a Master's of Divinity. Reverend Mariama is committed to engaging the faith community on social justice issues, and particularly Black churches on ecological justice. She speaks throughout the country and serves on a number of boards and committees, including the New England Grassroots Environmental Fund, Union Capital Boston, and Moral Movement Massachusetts.
So it's great to be here. Many of you I know, and some of you are new faces. So, but it's great to be back. So first, I think to talk a little bit about how I came to the place of working on ecology, and we'll talk afterwards because I'm actually in the middle of a church planning process. Yeah. So anyway, so in high school, I was in high school when the whole moment that the ozone layer was being depleted, where everybody started sort of figuring this out, and there was an environmental club at my school. Wasn't part of it, but I, like many people, I remember I was like, this was like the 90s, and I was like, we can't use hairspray, which was like a big deal in the 90s because a lot of the bad hairdos required hairspray. But it was one of those moments of like great success. Like in 3 years, people sort of were able to eliminate these chemicals, and it was like, all right, it's all good. So I knew about climate change or heard about climate change pretty early on, but like I think I had a little bit of the mentality like, yeah, they're gonna like fix that. People will get together. It's all gonna shift, right? And the other piece of that was that I also, in high school, one of the reasons I never joined the environmental club is that it was predominantly white, and there was a huge focus on like saving polar bears and like other things, which I think is important. But my cousins were being locked up at the same time. This was the height of violence in Boston, and it felt to me like I cannot be fighting to save polar bears when people in my community are dying. And that it felt like there was not common cause. The other people that cared about the environment didn't care as much about the issues I was working on. And so I had the mentality, I think, that a lot of people of color do, that like, I'm gonna let the like well-meaning white people deal with that issue because there's all these other things over here that I need to be focused on. And so that held throughout high school. I got involved with Project Hip Hop, did a lot of study of the civil rights movement, was really engaged around issues of education and criminal justice reform. And then went to college, and interestingly enough, particularly when I was at Stanford, there was a whole crew of folks who had been environmentalists who were starting to talk about environmental justice, right? And I remember Seth, who was one of my friends at the time, white guy. I mean, he looked like the part of, he was like super, as we used to say, crunchy looking. But he was part of, and not just him, but others, a coalition of folks who were asking how do we move forward a larger agenda for justice on our campus. We went about it with Condoleezza Rice quite a bit in those days. And so, college for me was a time where I struggled a lot to pull together all the different pieces of who I was. I had grown up singing and doing liturgical dance in church, so I was part of the arts community, but it was deeply disconnected from any kind of religious tradition. And then you had the sort of more evangelical leaning, Christian expressions in that area that did not match the social justice tradition that I came out of in my faith tradition. So I'm going to church, but I'm not feeling connected there. And then I was an activist. That's been my thing since, my first activist act, I think in the seventh grade, was to boycott Coca-Cola for their engagement in apartheid. So for me, I grew up with an artistic life, a justice life, and a faith life that were all, there was no separation between those things, but during my time in college felt a lot like that was the case. And so I came out and was leading a social justice organization that wasn't faith-based, right? But as I was moving along, I started to sort of feel this challenge, this sense that things shouldn't be so disconnected. That some of the things that I was experiencing and some of the lack of progress I felt in criminal justice, in youth, development, was because I felt like, why are we so bifurcated? Like, why, for me, it all seems connected, but you have to choose that I'm gonna like go to church here, but then I'm gonna go to this like activist meeting here, and then and so that was something that was very frustrating. And so I felt more able to do ministry in the work I was doing at Project Hip Hop with young people around the arts, and the ability to sort of really dig into the deep issues that were affecting them. But I couldn't say what I was thinking, which is what would God want to have happen in this moment? And so there was a huge turning point for me, I think, in 2005, though it took quite a while to do anything about that. But when Hurricane Katrina hit, I had been the executive director of Project Hip Hop for 4 years by that point. We had moved into our offices on September 11th. Like, we were picking up our office equipment downtown from an organization that was going out of business and moving it while downtown was being abandoned because people were like, I don't know if a plane is going to go to a building. And we had, because we did the civil rights tour, we had these long relationships with organizations in New Orleans, particularly that have been working around criminal justice reform. And so when I saw the streets flooding, it was not like those were places I hadn't heard of. I knew young people that lived in those communities. Earlier in that summer, one of our own young people had been on retreat with us, ready to start his summer job, and killed on my birthday because he had recently got out of juvenile detention and folks that he knew from that life had sort of cornered him on that. So when that storm came, for me it felt symbolic of something that I felt was deeply wrong, and it felt like the earth was speaking in the way that we see in the Bible when it talks about, like, and then there was a storm, or then there was a drought, and people made direct connections between what was happening in the earth and what God was saying, what God wanted. And I began to feel that. And so by the time I left in 2014 to come to seminary, it was very clear to me that I was leaving the nonprofit world to go into the church world, not to remain in that bifurcated setup, but to ask myself the question, how do we craft and create a faith space that speaks to all of it? And that says the earth is speaking, and it's not like a side note, like, oh, and then you recycle on the side because you're a good person, but like, we are in the midst of a serious crisis, and we are called to evolve in this moment or die. I had that same feeling, like, I do not understand how we are continuing to live life as though everything is all good, when in 100 years it could be almost impossible for people to live in some 60% of the planet. Like, how do we know that to be true and keep functioning like it's all good? So, when I think about ecology, I mean, people, yes, I do work on very traditional environmental things, but I try in every way that I can, and always when I talk about this, to say what we are actually facing is a moral, spiritual crisis, and the earth is speaking out to us. And that crisis is about how we are in relationship with all the life in this planet. Because it doesn't say God created this stuff, the waters, and they were like sort of kind of good, and then God created humans, and it was amazing! Like, that's not what it says. We got one day, the rest of the planet got the other 5 days, and somehow we've come to the notion that it's like really all about us, and that we have the right to behave in ways that I just do not see any biblical justification for. And on top of that, we can't even treat our species right. Like, we can't even act right to each other. And we're not happy. We're not happy living the way that we're living. So why maintain a system that actually doesn't work for us, that leads us into injustice, and that threatens our future existence? I mean, that doesn't seem like a system worth maintaining. And so that's the approach that we take and that I take around ecology. It is not just about polar bears. We do need to save species because God created polar bears, and we don't have the right to decide that they can no longer exist. But it's so much deeper than like one particular species or even like one solar project. If we don't take the full totality really into our spirits, then I think we miss what we're called to in this moment. So to be a little bit more, to drill down sort of more specifically, right now I coordinate coordinate the ecological justice ministry at our church, which we recently changed our name to Eco Bethel, which is Eco Bethel, but it also stands for the Ecological Community of Bethel, and the recognition that we exist. Ecology, so you'll notice I don't use the word environment very much because environment is something external to us. Ecology is a system of relationships in which we exist. And when I talk about ecological justice, the reality is there's a problem in those relationships. There's an imbalance in so many ways that the ecosystem is being thrown off. And the main culprit of that ecosystem is us. If we get ourselves together, we can help the rest of the ecosystem to survive. Now, I will say, one group that ain't gonna go is the insects. I love to study them because they are not dying. No matter what you think, mosquitoes will make it come back. No matter what we do, they will find a way to survive. But anyway, that's a side note. So at Bethel, we have 4 pillars of our ministry. The first is eco-theology. And really that is the first. If people don't understand how this, if they think this is another side, I don't know how many people have sort of heard about this idea of moralistic, therapeutic deism, this notion that we just want to be good people. No, we do not do this work simply to be nice people who recycle. This is an imperative of our faith. And so we really try to be really clear with people, help them to see the connections, help them to see this as something that they are called to live, not just something that they can do if they're being nice. So that's first. The second is that connecting with creation. We believe that it's hard to value something that you don't have a relationship with, and so it's everything from, we just sponsored something called Food as Medicine to really help people learn about the properties of food and how eating well can do more for you than sometimes your blood pressure medication. You may still have to take your blood pressure medication, but there are amazing properties of foods, and if we're eating them well, that can bring healing to us. And again, going back to the eco-theology, this is a gift from God that we have not been appreciating, right? And how do we begin to appreciate those things differently? The third is sustainable habits. How do we, as an obedience to our faith, look at how we're doing things? And so we have 3 pillars: energy, water, and waste. We're not the only people that do that, but and so the fourth is political engagement. So for instance, as an example, you can go to our church website, www.bethelame.org/solar, and there's a video about the solar project we did. We were part of 3 churches that came together to do a solar project. In the middle of the project, the legislature changed the incentives for solar, requiring all of us to reduce the size of our projects pretty significantly, because originally we had these big old roofs that could host more solar panels than what the church needs to power itself. And so we had set up a structure where we would be able to give power away to families who were energy insecure. And so because of the changes in the legislature, we weren't able to do the same size project. We went ahead and did something because we felt like people need to see this. This needs to be part of our witness and testimony, but it's not okay what happened. And so we have testified at the State House on a number of occasions. There is a bill called Solar Access for All that's in both the State House and the House. By the grace of God, it's been included with the Senate Omnibus Energy Bill, so it's in play right now, and if you're interested in making calls, I can tell you who you can do that to support that. But what's really important is that we're trying to, again, not just make it possible for us to fill our roof, but to really make that connection. So it was powerful to be able to be at the State House in my collar testifying about the moral obligation we have to make sure that renewable energy is available to all. And what I said is, we are taking energy that God has given to us, and so it has to be available to the people that God cares about, which is all of us, but it is most importantly those who are poor and marginalized. And so if the state is creating renewable energy bills that are leaving out those folks that God cares about most, then we are in violation of who we should be as people of faith. And that is very different language than what people are used to hearing about why they should support solar. And so it's been exciting because it's created opportunities for us to create connections and relationships between your traditional environmental folks up on the Hill and the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus. And our hope is that we could get to a point where the Environmental Caucus and the Black and Latino Caucus work together more deeply, because it would change how people imagine. Both the environmental folks need some help on some equity and justice issues, and the Black and Latino caucuses tend to think, oh, this is not like our thing. But by having this bill that really looked at supporting low-income families and increasing renewables, we've had real opportunities to bring together some non-traditional alliances. So I think I'm out of time, so I will stop there.
Well, thank you for those really inspirational presentations, all about holism, integration, all kind of sparks are going off in my head, and I'm sure in all of our heads right now. Now, the way I'd like to handle the question period is let's take 2 or 3 questions, and then the panelists can choose to respond or not to respond to those questions, and then we'll take 2 or 3 more questions, rather than just having one question and then being monodirectional that way. Let's start. Please just stand and say who you are and put out your question or discussion point that you'd like to see the panelists engage.
Don't be shy, y'all. Come on.
Do we have to stand?
No, you don't have to.
My name's Carly. My question is about the. I don't know why y'all are laughing. My question's about the pizza church and pancake church. I would imagine that one of the critiques of boutique churches is that they're not intergenerational, and I was curious about your response to that.
So my name is Alicia Vela Stewart, and I have a question specific to Thrive. So for many of us who are working in missions in local churches, we're dealing with very transient populations who have criminal backgrounds, have been recently released from being incarcerated. How do you, is that part of your integrated approach? It's not just social services, but how are these people also being integrated into communities of faith, where that is a significant support system that sometimes gets overlooked? And how are you helping those communities, if you're doing that, those communities of faith embrace those who perhaps have backgrounds that make it difficult for them to be full members of a particular congregation or a particular faith community?
Let's take one more question. Okay, well, why don't we start with these two questions?
All right, I'll jump in. So, all right, I do get this question a lot about boutique, because someone says, well, why don't you make a worship service that's for everybody, right? And that's it's a tired critique. I think it's lame. No offense to you. I think it's lame because I think the way that we do church now is boutique to old white people, right? There's tons of old white people in churches the way that we do it now, but it suits their needs perfectly, which is why they're the only people left, right? And so that's just the dollar and cents answer there. I mean it's when we say for everybody, usually we mean for white people. And in our current situation right now, it's for old white people that have been in church for their entire lives and want to go to Sunday school and sing Amazing Grace every week, or Old Rugged Cross, or whatever it is, in the garden, But I think it's if you try to do it for everybody, you're gonna do it for nobody, So I think being hyper specific and trying to reach specific groups of people that are currently underrepresented, I think that's the strength of it, and we don't have to be 300 people. We can be small, sustainable groups to where people feel come alive.
Lisa, to your question, so that we don't have a structure of how churches can better integrate returning citizens into their community. But there are ways that we're engaging faith communities to help in maybe possibly a slower way, but so I have a message that I share at any faith community that wants to have a guest speaker or preacher, or whatever you want to call it. And one of the things that I talk about during that time is the language that we use. And so first of all, like training your communities, our faith communities, and our broader societal community to change the language that we use around people who have experienced incarceration. So we don't talk about ex-cons anymore. We don't talk about criminals or offenders. We talk about, for Thrive, we use the term returning citizen, or talk about people who have specific experiences, because those experiences do not define the person that they are. And are always way more complicated than we like to call them. Like those labels don't allow for the complexity that brought them to that place. So that's one way. Another way is inviting our community members to take part in our trainings. The two trainings that we do, one is specific to preparing people to be volunteers in circles of support and accountability, but we make it accessible to anyone in the community, because the conversations that happen in that training are about what is the experience of reentry like, what are the kinds of restrictions that are placed on a person's life, and how can that impact the way that they are in the world, the way that they cope with challenges, and the limitations that that puts on them because of, and how to cope with that. So, like when you're stressed, who do you turn to for support? If those people aren't in your life, what do you do? And what are those natural coping mechanisms? What happens in your life when someone takes away one of your greatest coping mechanisms to get through it? You know, we all turn into a bit of a mess. So not saying that people are messes, but to understand what's really happening in their lives. So I'd say our entry point is in training and preparing people, rather than saying, all right, now be a nice place for someone to come and
Right.
return to. It has to happen a little bit more prior to that. We have to be trained beforehand.
My name is Maggie, and I have a question just for all three of you. I think a lot of times we hear about burnout in the mission field, and so what are ways that you take self-care, or make sure to rejuvenate yourself so that there is continued innovation and lack of burnout?
My name's Michaela, and my question's for Mariama. I was more interested to hear about the food as medicine, and is that a curriculum-based thing? Is it connected to public schools at all? Just if you could speak more about that.
Why don't we start with that question?
I have a question.
We'll go ahead and just do the two, and then you're next.
Okay, so I'll do the food as medicine, then to burn out.
Yeah.
Okay. So the food as medicine is, so a member of our church is the executive director of the Urban Farm Institute. And they do food as medicine with a particular emphasis on communities of color. So they, for instance, we didn't get them this time, but next time, they have 2 African American beekeepers that hopefully will be able to host in the farm and in the fall. I'm trying to convince people to put bees on the church property, but we're a ways from that. The compost, that's authentically coming. The bees, that's a lot of prayer. So that's who we use locally. So the Urban Farm Institute, but the AME Church actually has a new thing through the Health Commission that's called Food RX, like prescription, and they're actually promoting this nationally, and you don't actually have to be an AME to do it. There's nobody like, what? You don't have a church affiliation. So if you're interested in it, and that's a video-based curriculum that they're doing for, I think it's $99. And what they're asking churches to do is whoever in your congregation most deals with food and hospitality, they want the churches to sponsor that person do it, because one of their points is that we're like, oh, God wants us to be healthy, and now let's go into the fellowship hall and drink sugar punch and pound cake, and yeah, it's so So they're trying to, this is something we're doing particularly at Bethel as part of our ministry, but it's also crosses over into the health ministry. This is National Nutrition Month, so there's stuff actually going on at the church right now. If you come to church Sunday, it's Smoothie Sunday, so after church you can get healthy smoothies, but they're also giving people the recipes and teaching them how to do it and things like that. So the nice thing is that, and this is something we're trying to do in all of the things in church, is that whenever there is crossover, getting organizations to work together. So we co-sponsored that with the Allied Health Ministry. But yeah, Urban Farm Institute, which is great, they just had a huge farming conference last weekend. So you could go and they will come out and it's beautiful. I mean, they bring stuff right from their farm, so it's just, the display was gorgeous. But also, if you go to the AME Health Commission website, you could actually access that curriculum, which I think is going to be very similar. So, and in terms of burnout, so I just believe that you have to have a practice. You have got to have a practice, and not a theoretical practice. Like, you need to know what it is. You need to know what it is, and you need to know when it is. Right? I'm praying. Yeah, and I believe in prayer, and I'm not saying prayer is beautiful and awesome. It is not enough, in my opinion. Right? I think you have to have, if you can, a physical practice, one that connects your body with your spirit. So for me, running has been one of those things. And I used to run through my neighborhood and pray at the same time, especially when I, unfortunately, some of the places where young people had been killed, I would go past. And, so that's my thing. I do yoga. I've just started getting back, which, praise God, I was 4 days a week last week. I've already been yesterday. But I think that I consider all of that work part of my spiritual practice. Once a month, I take a full day in silence, no cell phone, no email, no speaking. And it's hard. Every once in a while, I have to reschedule it, because my mother-in-law was in town, and I was like, she's here for 3 days, and I don't want to not speak to her for one of them, so I have to do a different day. I just felt a little problematic. But it's on the calendar, and people know, like, oh, whoops, today's her day of silence. I will not be getting a response to this email. And it's not a full Sabbath. I do envy my Jewish brothers and sisters who take full Shabbat every week. It's something I'm thinking about in the church plant, if we could encourage people to have a Shabbat once a month, where families plan around not going anywhere or just being in relationship with other people. But I just think really, like, it can't be an add-on. It can't be like I'm gonna get around to it. You need to schedule it like any other thing. Like, oh, sorry, I can't do a board meeting that night. That's my yoga night. And that's how I am about stuff. Like, oh, well, maybe next quarter I could move to a different class. But you can't allow, because if you don't give it that kind of priority, you'll look up, you won't have done it for months, and you'll be wondering why you feel really depressed, why you are bitter with the people in your life. Like, you just can't play with it. And I think that the notion that this is part of my spiritual practice like every other thing, and that I must model it as a minister for other people. So if I'm not doing it, then my folks are not going to do it, so I shouldn't cancel it because I'd be setting a bad example.
I got strong feelings about self-care, y'all. I need to hold on. All right, I need to calm my breath a little bit. All right, I've witnessed a cheapening of the word self-care in the last 5-6 years since I've been in seminary. Where self-care is not watching Netflix, y'all. Okay, from a theological perspective, and I've seen self-care used as an excuse not to get your sugar honey iced tea done. If you know what I mean? All right, acronym. All right. I've seen people say all right, I can't come into work because I need to have some self-care time, or I need to take a Sabbath, or I need to you need to have the Methodist tradition started as a call to discipline, right? We need to throw out self-care and replace it with discipline, okay? And that's radical, right? But if you pray, you will feel better. If you have spiritual disciplines, your day will feel better. If you don't have time for spiritual disciplines, go to bed at 9, set your alarm for 5. Guarantee you'll find the time to do it. We need to make time, carve out time to do things that we know will make us feel better. Wesley called them the means of grace, all right? God's grace is available to all, but we still have to reach out our hand and dip into that never-ending well and bring it to our lips. And that's what prayer and Bible study and community accountability groups and taking a run and doing yoga, that's what those things are. They're means of grace. You have to do them. We need to celebrate and reclaim discipline. And if you do that, suddenly you're going to have more energy and you're going to have more time. If you don't have time, delete Facebook off your phone. You're going to find some time, right? If you don't have time, don't watch Netflix for 3 hours a night. Write a page a day so that you don't end up having 60 pages due at the end of the semester and suddenly you have to pull an all-nighter. Become disciplined and you're going to find more energy and more time. You're more capable to do more things than you ever thought, and you're not going to be bored and you're not going to be depressed, and you're going to feel much better. All right, so that's what I think. Throw out self-care. It's become cheap. All right, it's a buzzword. All right, take care of yourself by doing the things you know are going to make you feel better, which are spiritual disciplines, eating your vegetables, drinking water, taking care of yourself through disciplines. That's my thought. Also, take 2 days off a week, y'all. People fought and died in the labor movement so that we could have a weekend, all right? If you don't take days off, you are not living in their memory. People fought and died for you to have a day off. Take it. If you don't take it, you're trampling on their memory. Take a day off. Most of us are going to go into jobs where we can at least set some of our schedule. If you don't set the time to take a day off, then you're not doing anything. You're going to wear yourself out and do less. You will be more productive if you take 2 full days off every week. 2. That's what they fought for. Take them. Yeah. And if you're too busy to take a day off, you're too busy. Be less busy. Yeah, go for it. Sorry.
Well, towards that end, I think something that I picked up from Zach along the way is how many times do you say no to something before you say yes?
Oh, it's 3 to 1, easy. Yeah, just say no to less stuff. If you
say
taking
no to more stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. Sorry. If you taking on a responsibility is going to prevent you from spending time with your family or exercising or doing the things that you've already committed to doing well, then just don't do it. Nobody cares. Nobody's going to be mad at you if you say no. They might be for 5 minutes and then they'll find someone else to be mad at. All right. Take care of yourself by living simply. Okay. If your calendar is so full of meetings and stuff that you have to have a ding in your pocket every 5 minutes just to remember where you're going, you're too busy. Do less stuff. Yeah, you'll get more done. It's amazing. The less you do, the more you get done. It's amazing.
And the only one piece that I'll add to that is, and just to reiterate those importance of taking time for your for Sabbath is the white space is actually space white space undefined, not colored in just white space. It is the place where innovation happens. So if you don't give yourself that white space, you're just gonna be swimming in all the stuff to do that you always have to do, and there's always gonna be a longer list to do, especially when you begin to innovate. So take the time.
Two more questions.
Hi, my name is Uche, and my question is for Mariama and Zach. I've been thinking about what Zach was talking about when he was talking about finances to grow your church. I'm wondering how it will help me, a person of color. How can I generate money when sometimes even though I have a brilliant idea, because of the color of my skin, it doesn't get me what I want. Is there any other way in your experience, both of you, that a person of color can generate money?
A couple questions, and I'm not quite sure if any of this is applicable to Mariana, except maybe the networking. So, do you try to, or do you have a program for networking with area churches? And I'm thinking particularly my church, around the ecology programs that you have at yours.
Yep.
And for both Zach and for the Thrive organization, I was just wondering, more for Thrive, do you partner with social organizations that provide, say, mental health counseling, having worked with at-risk populations or re-entering adults, sometimes there are things that come up that are not in our purview, and if so, do you make those services available, particularly in mental health, and only because of a recent issue last week that we had in one of our organizations. And I think that's it. Do you?
So I guess you go ahead.
Sure. Absolutely. So one of the, within our circles of support and accountability, that's our volunteers and our returning citizen. But supporting that is a reentry coach, someone who's a staff person at Thrive, and is working to build connections between the other organizations and agencies who are working in the care of our returning citizens. So that would include mental health services, that includes addictions counseling, it includes probation and parole at times. So anyone who's involved in that process, we do try to build that bridge, and it's a continual process. Building partnerships takes time, but yes.
So here's I have pretty good news, which is that I am funded now to support other congregations to do the same thing, and so I am in conversations with folks around. The goal would be over this next couple of months to identify a few congregations. Three is my max, just because I want to be really available to them. And none is set in stone, so there's still definitely space. The goal would be to spend the summer meeting with the folks who would like to be in leadership, and then September 1st through October 7th is the time for creation on the sort of World Council of Churches, and so the goal would be that congregations would have a Creation Care Sunday somewhere in that time as a launch to sort of reach out to their larger congregation and make them aware. So yeah, if you are interested, it is specifically focused on churches of color. If folks are interested and you're in a congregation that's not of color, I also have resources available, but yeah, let's talk.
As far as income generation goes,
that's
fundraising. Okay, so traditionally, church groups have given white males money, right? And so if you go to like church planting conferences, it's like a sea of people that look like me, basically. And so I think like we can't expect, like we have to look at the systems and say where have they failed us, right, as the body of Christ in representing the entire creativity and beauty of the ideas that are available and the innovation that's available. And they've not, so I think we need to start looking outside, right, and think of like creative ways to raise money. Like for us, it was baking bread and making websites, which are, based on skills that I picked up as I've entered into this ministry, right? But I think there's something that each of us can do that is like you're bringing a skill that you can use to leverage, your success of your organization, right? So I have a friend who's a photographer. I told her, you should just spend 10 hours a week doing like photography events and do it 100% as a fundraiser for your church, right? Or people who, communities that make like tamales or something like that. Sell your tamales, make them as a community, sell them in the community, support your local economy, raise money for the church. Churches have been doing like fundraisers like this for as long as there's been churches. Churches do the yard sale, they do the there's one church that I know of in New England that makes like $50,000 a year selling pumpkins. I mean, like, like think about like something off the wall, interesting that, and the other thing too is I'll just say, I have like a 3-tiered like decision-making process for fundraisers, where like the goal of the fundraiser, and it should cover all 3 of these bases. It should. I think it should match your mission. So it should be on brand, for lack of a better word. It should when people see it, they shouldn't go like, what? Like, they sell used cars? What are you talking about? Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? It should match your vision. There should be something about it. Like when we say that we sell bread, it just makes like intuitive sense to people that, oh, of course they sell bread, right? And make sure that it like fits your mission. Make sure that it actually makes money. How many churches support preschools that costs them money, right? And to start a drain on time, energy, and resources, right? It should actually make money. So if it doesn't work, quit, right? Like, give yourself permission to fail. Say, all right, that was a cool idea, but we're gonna stop selling pumpkins or whatever we're doing. Like, it didn't actually work. Just give yourself permission to like quit things, right? And then the other thing is it should be like a tool for reaching out into the community and meeting new people, okay? And like, if there's one that it does like super well, and then the other two it doesn't do great, you can justify doing it, right? So like, if what you're, like our website fundraiser, it makes us more money than it allows us to meet new people or like spread the news about the church, but we make a significant fundraiser out of it, and so it's like okay for me to justify the amount of time that goes into it. Bread makes less money than websites, but I meet dozens of people every week, so I can justify the time that goes into it. And both of those are like on brand, like stuff like helping churches with their digital presence is something that I think we can justify doing. Spending the time making bread is something we can justify doing. So I think it has to like kind of hit those three bases: on brand, actually raises money, helps you meet new people. And if it doesn't do like any of those things, quit.
So I am, as I'm looking at a church plant also, and what my setup is, because we didn't have a building to sell, so we're not gonna walk in with any kind of budget. So I am set up for the next 2 years to be fully sustainable, separate from the church. So the church will get 15 hours of my time for free, so that I'm not, and because I've seen one of the things that kills church plants is when you need them to produce money faster than they can, the minister ends up in a not healthy relationship with that church. Because you need it to do something for you that it's not able to do, and so then you're trying to make it do that. And so in my case, for instance, I'm funded to do, I have 2 lines of sort of life that are sort of, one is speaking and preaching, and the nice thing is we won't be a Sunday morning church. We haven't decided fully what hour exactly, but it will not be in the morning because that's not best what reaches the folks that we're trying to reach. So that will free me to preach on Sunday mornings elsewhere if I need to. I do preaching and speaking around ecological stuff, and then I also have the funding to support other churches around building these ecological ministries. So between those 2 sort of core streams of revenue, I'll be able to live separate from the church. And the truth is that communities of color often have had ministers that are bivocational. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because as we talk about, Zach's mentioning, when you are reliant on the church for your income, it sets up a different kind of relationship that's not always healthy. If you can do it, there may come a point where I cannot sustain, where the demands are such that I need to move in that direction. But hopefully that is because there are enough people and enough work to do that, and if the work is meaningful enough to people, they'll also financially support it. But my huge, and just having talked to other church planters and thinking about this, is if you can give yourself at least 2 years, that is sort of the number I took away from people. Because after 2 years, you kind of know, is this working or not working, or do we need to change course or whatever. So I've set myself up to have 2 years of not needing to derive any income. And if it happens, because speaking and preaching is not something I have to I will have signed a contract to do for years, I could always pull back on that and then make a different decision. But I feel much healthier, and I feel much better about my sense of self-worth not being totally dependent on whether we take off and blah blah blah, because my bills can still get paid whether we take off or not.
I think you hit on a very important point, which is like diversification of your income streams. Okay, most churches only rely on passing the plate, which is a completely illogical way to raise money, y'all. Because on the one hand, like if you have a church with 40 people in it and your budget's $100,000, that is not a sustainable fundraiser, right? And like we've only been raising money as a church that way for like 100 years, okay? For the longest, like churches were paid from taxes, right? Like churches didn't have to worry about like how they're gonna, because it was all paid for by like the the government. There was like no separation of that. Like paying for our ministers just by passing the plate is like a really new thing. Like monks made beer and jam. They worked their tails off. They farmed, and it was because they knew they had to like generate their own income. So I think like if you diversify your income streams, it allows you to kind of set up a security blanket. And like you should see money as like you're laying down track ahead of a train, okay? And the more track you have ahead of the train, the more secure you are, right? And like you don't want to like ever get to the point where laying track becomes your job, right? But if the train's coming and you don't want the thing to run off the train, then you're going to be putting a lot of sweat energy into laying down track, right? So you need to just find a way where it's steady, even, feels like it does not like take away from your self-worth and your I almost said self-care. Your well-being. So yeah, but yes, money makes everybody stressed out, but I think that's okay. I think we just need to kind of own it a little better.
And I just want to say really quickly, pray and plan about it.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes people think like, oh, this is not spiritual to have to think about that. Like I'm only going to think about the discipleship program. Well, the discipleship program might fall apart if you get shut out of your building, right? So I think, for me, I spend a lot of time saying, God, what is my mission? What is it that you want me to do? By virtue of that, what is it that you don't want me to do? Which is where I struggle, because I'll add more and more things to do. And then how am I going to financially sustain myself in a way that money does not stress me out and then,
Exactly.
derail the other things that I need to be doing.
I just want to add a historical note to this. Mission vision has always preceded money.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you look at things that look like well-established missions or whatever, usually it's because somebody just jumped in and did it, and then people later chose to support it. And that's another aspect of mission, being from the margins. And that's why it's involved so many women and lay people. People just jump in and start doing things. And then the money, if it succeeds, then that follows. Okay, more questions. Got two here, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've all, each one of you have kind of touched on this, and I just would kind of want to see the other side of this as how institution or churches are helpful in some ways, and are they? I don't know. I mean, as somebody who's interested in working in the United Methodist Church, but also very interested in working outside in more nonprofit settings, I'm kind of interested in. I can see how you can get caught in these frameworks that make you reliant on these institutions. But what are some of the reasons that you would connect with churches, like the church, I guess?
Yeah, my question also kind of has to do with the church, and that is the holding the tension of the traditional idea of a local church, but bridging that into something new that can be outward focused. So yeah, the inward focus on like a local church setting and the congregations that are there and still find value in traditional worship, but also focusing it on changing what's going on in the world.
So I think I'll try to address those two things. So I ran a nonprofit for 14 years. I was executive director of a nonprofit. And I left it because ultimately I decided I was tired of getting money from people who were different than the constituency I was serving. And I was tired, for me, in the, we were able to be partially holistic, but I wanted to be like, I had young people calling me outside of the space, wanting to pray. I got to points where, my young people were being killed. I was going to funerals, being led by people who knew nothing about their lives. I started to feel like there was constrictions about the nonprofit sector too. So I don't want to, there is no perfect structure out there. The question is, what is it that you feel most called to do, and which structure best suits you to do that? I am now moving into church space because I feel like I wanted to move beyond just serving people and to something where I felt like there was more space to co-create with people. I think that, so we'll be a church. Yes, we will be a church. Now, here's where I think there's a challenge. There's a way that churches are orienting currently that I actually think is not even historical. When I was growing up, you had the sense that you were going to be there a lot. We were there a lot. It was a community. It was not a service that you went to. Right. Now, I know that there are other people that people have come up in many different traditions, but at least I can speak mostly in Black churches. If you went once a week, it was like you weren't legit, right? And so now we're competing with a lot of other things, and so that's its own challenge. So on the church side, for instance, at our church, you won't be able to join on Sunday because you can't be a member unless you're in a small group. If you're not in a small group of accountability, then how do we know that you're committing to do the work? I don't think you can overcome race and class by showing up and singing together for 2 hours. It may inspire you. It may help you to have the desire, but you still got to do the hard work of being in real relationship with real people. When your kid's exposed to you about something that you thought you were in a different place, and what you see happening, and you got to process that and work through that and figure that all out. And I actually think in a lot of ways that's actually going back to who the church used to be. So when people ask me, the AME church, for instance, had something called the class system. It still exists. Very few people use it. It is a Methodist notion, but it is and it's a bad word. Then there used to be cell groups. That's not so fashionable. So we're just going with small groups, accountability groups. We're trying to figure out what's the best thing. But that class system put everybody in a small group that somebody was responsible for knowing when you were sick. Someone responsible being like, I didn't see you in church on Sunday. I'm gonna give you a call, right? That kind of deep relational accountability. Now, this challenge is, in our tradition, there usually was a leader that sort of took care of a small group of people. They didn't meet together as much, but Nat Turner planned, I mean, it obviously didn't all work out in the end, but Nat Turner planned that slave uprising through the class system of the AME church, right? So it's not something new. You know, I'm like totally down with the AME tradition. So you can get over the fact that we're not going to sing the doxology twice. So I think that's the question is like, I don't think we're abandoning things. I think we're reinvigorating things, and I think if we can help people to see that. And I love the AME church in all of its beauty and its deep flaws. I know both sides of that, and I'm choosing not to leave until they push me out. And I'm not hoping that they'll push me out, but there's sometimes, I stand differently on LGBT issues than where my church is, and I am clear that this is where the Holy Spirit has brought me. I believe she's going to be working on them too. And I'm hoping that we can do this work together. I'm not leaving. I'm willing to stay in dialogue and conversation with my denomination as we work this through. So I think, I celebrate people who go non-denominational. I'm not hating on that. There are a lot of constraints that come through. But for me, this is like family. You can't just walk away from your family, even when they drive you crazy. And how do I love and pray and also ask them to be where I think God has called them to be? To say that I think God has called us to be more than who we are right now. I think God will move mightily if we're open to following what the Holy Spirit is calling us to in this moment. But, the Holy Spirit done been calling me for things for a long time, and I didn't do it. So I can't be mad when other people and other institutions don't get it together, because I've got personal life examples. I mean, how many years have I been trying to lose weight? How unhealthy is it? How do I know it contributes to breast cancer? A good friend of mine is going through chemo. It has now remotivated me to get it together. So I can't call out anybody else for not doing things they know God has called them to, because that's me too.
And I'll just add to that, in terms of the strengths of the institution. So even though Thrive is a secular organization, our practice, our traditions, circles of support and accountability is a lot like covenant groups, these accountability. I mean, they are accountability groups. It just happens that we have people from different faiths or non-faiths that are in the circle. And spirituality often comes up in those conversations. So I think the traditions within the institution are like, there are things that we should continue to learn from and grow from. And then I also think that the networks that our institutions have set up are amazing and could do really powerful things if we choose to use them in the right ways, and follow the kind of the guidance of where we're called to be within those networks.
Yeah. United Methodist like connection is a sleeping giant, and if we could just like shake it awake, we could shake the foundations of the earth. You know, I mean, like there's power in that, and we've been sleeping, we've been snoozing. I don't know, but okay, go to remind me your name again. I'm so sorry.
Elizabeth.
Okay, can you like restate your question? Like as I understood it, were you saying like, what about people who are like kind of like in these churches and they like the traditional way of doing things? Is that kind of where you're getting at, basically?
Yeah, that's basically what I said.
Okay. So, all right. From my perspective, there, like what we do, we tend to like put things into like good and bad categories, right? So like, are we going to go contemporary worship or traditional worship, right? And then there's arguments within the church about which is better, which is going to get the young people or whatever, you know? Are we going to like, you know, do a, you know, like a Catholic style, like high church worship or a low church service? Are we going to be a cowboy church? Are we going to be a, you know, a praise band church? And we kind of like set up these like dichotomies or whatever. I think we need to come at it from like a like value neutral perspective and say that worship style is value neutral, right? There's not a bad way to worship, right? You know, like I love traditional worship. I grew up in traditional churches. Like get me singing Old Rugged Cross with like a like Texas swing with like 30 of my church fam, and I'm like there, you know? Like that's what I grew up on. I love that. But what we're facing is like a math problem. Okay? If you have 10 people in worship and all of them are 75 plus, there's nothing wrong with being 75 plus. But in 10 years, you're going to come back and you're not going to have a church. We're looking at a declining membership at like epidemic rates. So we've seen 60% decline in the UMC in New England in the last 20 years. 60%. There's not going to be a church to reform if we don't do something, right? So like, I'm not talking about like one worship style being bad or whatever. You know, and this kind of gets back to Carly's question. Like we need to find the people that aren't there. And if we don't do it, then we can't like look at it and say like, all right, what happened? Like we know what happened. We didn't bring people in. You know, like the story of the farmer who has a good harvest, right? He keeps it all for himself. Like God comes to him and he says, like, you fool! Like whose is this gonna be now? Like this very night, your soul has been like taken up, and now all this stuff you got, whose is this gonna be? We got all these resources. We got this gospel that can feed people, and we're not bringing it to them. It's like what I tell people too is like, all right. I should have said this for Carly's question. I'm like doubling back here. Like, it's like we got real good at cooking brisket. I'm from Texas, all right? We can throw a barbecue like nobody else. And we throw that barbecue and we smoke that brisket for 6 hours on low heat, and we have it ready, and we set at a table, and we have the plates set, and we say, all right, come and eat my brisket, right? But the neighborhood's gone vegetarian, right? There's nothing wrong with cooking brisket. Brisket's good. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that people don't eat it, right? So we need to find ways to feed the people who are in our communities, and give them that like, because like the gospel still feeds people. We just need to find ways to like bring it to them in ways that they can experience it.
Well, I guess my question was not so much about like I agree with everything that you're saying. I guess my question was more about how, as I'm thinking of going into a context of local church ministry, and I'm probably going to be ministering to what you were calling the context of the old white people.
Right.
And I was just wondering if any of you had any experience in a church of encouraging and leading and going through the process of transforming so they could see the value of opening up beyond the traditional worship service. So it's all well and good to go into a church and be like, yeah, we need to go out into the world and we need to do this and we need to say this, and like our gospel is one to share, but it's completely different when you get into a church and there are people who are set in their ways and they are having difficulty going beyond that because it's a change and change is scary for them.
So I grew up in a church where that had happened. In fact, our minister was a student here at BU, and he was assigned there as a student minister. So I think the first thing is you have to help people have a missional heart, because only their love for the other people that you want to get there can overcome their desire for their personal comfort. Now, some people you cannot change. Like, you also have to recognize that there are some spirits. Yeah. You can't, I mean, technically you can't change anybody.
Right.
You really, what you're needing is the power of the Holy Spirit to intervene in people's lives. But one of the things our bishop says is that one of the reasons that people change is because they want their grandchildren to be saved. Right?
Yeah.
So if you can say to people, when was the last time your grandkids wanted to come? If we created something that made your grandchildren want to come, would that be more exciting and important to you in the long run than in our congregation? The AME Church is Blessed Assurance. Like, I swear you can't have a conference, maybe not even a day of a conference without singing Blessed Assurance. You know, but I even think about things like, how can you help young people remix Blessed Assurance so that the sound matches them and the words match what, you know. So I think the big thing is, again, getting people more excited about who can come to Christ than about the comfort of their day-to-day. And I think that's unfortunately one of the problems, is that we think church is there for us to feel good for 2 hours or 1 hour a week. And like, that is such a low standard of what Jesus came for.
Yeah.
That is it's achievable. You can certainly have some piece of that in your day, but yeah. So I think finding the ways to help people get excited about those possibilities. And like at our church, the big thing was, and I was too young wasn't even born when this happened. He did this mural where he invited artists from the community to come in, and there was a scene where one of them was, it was like a scene of Black life, and it included church scenes, but it also included like a club scene on the side, and people were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we have a club scene on the side of the church. But it was featured in the newspaper, and then people started coming in, and then in the community people started saying, I heard what you guys did at your church, that's amazing.
Right.
And so they started feeling like, yeah, it is amazing. And I'm like, you voted against it at the steward meeting, but you ain't gonna say that, you know. So I think that as people are celebrating. So, you know, like some of the people who were not so helpful on our solar panels say stuff like, our solar panels. That's right, they're all of ours.
Yeah.
Because when things start becoming successful, people want to own it, and they'll get over, you know, the fact that really they weren't supportive. In fact, they may forget that they were unsupportive in the beginning. And so I think, you know, pushing people in ways, so I think you want to pay attention to, especially if you're dealing with people, and you may not want to strike out far on the stuff that's on the very edges, because they're not ready to be there. You may be ready to be there, but they may not be ready to be there. So how can you push them? I say you first always have to assess where people are, and where is a push for where they are. You can't push them to where you are, because they're not, that'll be alienating and unrealistic. Help people get on the journey, push them to the edge of their limit, not the edge of your limit.
Can I take like a radical take? Do y'all mind if I kind of go off the rails a little bit? Like I think, like one question that I get from people who are in seminary, they're like, okay, it's all well and good that you got to go start this church, but I'm about to get an appointment. I know I'm going to be put like in a traditional church with like, they're set in their ways and they don't want to change. So what do I do? And my response is that like, you know, like leaders lead, okay? And if you know that there is a problem and you don't like work to solve the problem, then you're like partly responsible for the outcome. And so if you know that, you know, you've been given this authority by God to, you know, bring the gospel to all people, if your church is like actively preventing you from doing that, you need to make some unpopular decisions and make some people mad. and that's all right. And you're not there to make your congregants really happy all the time. There's going to be things that you do that are going to make them mad. And like here's the other thing too. Like the system was set up for a system that works, and as these like systems aren't working, like young pastors tend to be put in churches that are toxic and mean. Like they're real, they are there. And so if you are put in a position by your DS in like a church that's finances are all screwed up and they're mean to you and they are not letting you do the things that you need to do, like your DS does not own you. They do not own you. Your call to ministry does not come from your DS. Your call to ministry comes from God. Okay? So that's what I would say. Like you need to like take the authority that you've been given and lead and like make people mad, and that's okay. Like you can do that.
Even Jonathan Edwards was fired from his church.
Right.
That's what I was saying. Church history classes, most decent ministers are fired at least once.
Well, the one thing I will say about that is, if you do that while also loving people,
Absolutely.
you'll get really far. Like I'll say to people, I really feel like this is what God has called me to do, so I really can't do that. But let's talk about that. What do you feel like God is calling you to? Because usually they are not coming to you because they deeply prayed about it and have thought about what God is calling them. So when you ask them, God, you know what? There must be a place between what you feel called to and what I feel called to. What do you feel called to? When you ask them that question and you actually care, right? You're not secretly doing it to one-up them in the argument. You might actually open a space to minister to them spiritually, for them to ask the question, what has God called me to? Because maybe I'm holding on to this thing because it's the only thing I have, because I don't know what God has called me to. But maybe if I could get into that, then we could figure out how our callings can align. So I just think that when you enter the conversation with true love and true desire for people to grow spiritually,
Absolutely.
but also being clear with them, I cannot go against what I think God is calling me to, because I think I'll be held accountable in ways that are bigger than this one thing. Not always. Some people are just still janky, but often it opens different possibilities in the conversation.
And if you spent 6 hours praying with someone and eating with them and like sitting with them when they're sick and like given like a piece of your life and you know what's going on and they're like all up in your business and you're all up in their business in the best way and you're like a family with them. Like I got into like a serious argument with a parishioner the other day, right? We disagreed like hard on something and like our tempers flared and we argued it out and we hashed it out. He's coming to planning table tonight and he knows that I have his back and I know that he has mine, right? And we can disagree, it's all right. I think like church niceness has like gotten in the way of real progress. Like we want to talk in like half truths or like behind each other's backs when things get bad. We need to just like be able to like have the strength of a relationship where we can talk honestly to one another and tell people when they're wrong. Like sometimes people are just wrong, And another church planter that I said, this is like not the nicest way to say this, but he says sometimes you have to grow your church down before you can grow it up. And I think that's true. There are people who will stand in the way of your progress, and Jesus said, take off your sandals and knock the dust off them and move on. And that's sometimes you got to do that too.
We're going to draw this to a close because we want to have at least 10 minutes of our panelists' time for people for personal interaction. People have some classes at 11, but I know people are really eager to connect personally with particular people around your ministries and such. So join me in thanking this. Your coming here has been a great blessing to us, and we thank God for all of your work, and we will sustain you in prayer as we go along, in prayer for your ministry.